I slept alone for the first time in almost 2 years on the night everything finally came apart. The bed felt too big, like it was mocking me. One pillow sat untouched on his side, still carrying the faint impression of his head, the warmth already gone. I didn't move it. I couldn't. It felt like proof that my life had existed one way only hours ago, and now existed another way entirely. The clock on my phone read 2:14 a.m. I had been staring at the ceiling since midnight, replaying the same moments on a cruel loop. His voice, his hands, the way he'd said my name like it meant safety. Down the hall, a red and blue glow still flickered faintly through the curtains. I lived in a quiet neighborhood where the loudest sound was usually a lawnmower or a dog barking too long. Tonight, police lights lit up the street like a warning flare. They weren't here for me. That was the first thought I grabbed onto, the one that kept me from breaking completely. But the next thought followed immediately, heavy and unforgiving. They were here because of him. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, even though the room wasn't cold. My body didn't believe that yet. Shock does strange things. It steals heat, steals breath, makes you feel like you're floating just outside your own skin. Less than 12 hours earlier, I had fallen asleep to the sound of his breathing. Slow, steady, familiar. I had curled into his back the way I always did, my arm draped over his chest, my cheek pressed between his shoulder blades. I remember thinking before sleep took me, how grateful I was to finally feel settled at 35. How lucky I was to have found someone who made the world feel quieter. Now I wondered how many nights I'd slept like that beside a man capable of something unforgivable. A noise came from outside. Car doors opening and closing, muffled voices I couldn't quite make out. I flinched, my heart jumping into my throat, even though I knew no one was coming back inside. He was gone. Taken away in the back of a car I'd only ever associated with other people's nightmares. I pressed my fingers into the mattress where his hand usually rested. The sheets smelled like him. Soap and something darker underneath, something I could never quite name but had come to associate with home. The realization made my stomach turn. Home. The word felt dangerous now. I sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor was cold against my feet, grounding me just enough to keep from spiraling. I needed to breathe. I needed to remember that I was still here, that I was safe, or at least as safe as someone could be when their entire sense of reality had been ripped apart. On the dresser across the room sat a framed photo of us from last summer. We were smiling, sunburned, his arm around my waist. I looked happy in that picture. Not a forced smile, not one of those polite expressions you give a camera when you're pretending. I looked genuinely deeply content. I stood and turned the frame face down. I didn't know. I whispered to the empty room. The words felt both true and inadequate. People would question that soon. The police already had, gently at first, their eyes watching my reactions a little too closely. The world loves a woman who didn't know, until it decides she should have. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. My reflection startled me. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale, lips pressed into a hard line I didn't recognize. I looked older than 35 in that moment, like the night had added years instead of hours. When I closed my eyes, images rushed in uninvited. His phone lighting up face down on the table. The way he stiffened when the news came on. The tiny things I'd catalogued and dismissed because love makes you generous with excuses. The sound of a gentle knock echoed in my memory. Earlier that evening, before the lights, before the questions. Before my life split into before and after. I wrapped my arms around myself and leaned against the sink. I thought about the woman whose name I hadn't known yet this morning. The one whose face now flickered across my thoughts like a ghost. I wondered what her last night had been like. If she'd trusted someone too. If she believed she was safe sleeping beside a stranger. The guilt came in waves, thick, choking, relentless. Not because I had done it. I was clear on that. But because I had loved someone who did. Because my happiness had been built on a foundation I never bothered to inspect. Back in the bedroom, the silence pressed in from all sides. No television murmuring in the background. No weight shifting beside me. No whispered "You okay?" When I tossed too much in my sleep, I lay back down on one side of the bed, choosing my side deliberately. I stared at the darkened doorway and tried to remember the last moment before doubt crept in. The last day I woke up without a knot in my chest I couldn't explain. I knew sleep wouldn't come, not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments. Flashes of red and blue, his profile in the kitchen light, the way he didn't look at me when they said his name out loud. They tell you monsters don't look like monsters. I'd nodded along when I heard that on podcasts or crime shows, safe on my couch, certain I would know. Certain I would feel something undeniable. What no one tells you is how ordinary betrayal sounds. How quiet it is. How it slips its arm around you and breathes steadily while you sleep. As dawn crept closer, the sky lightening just enough to show the outlines of the room, I made myself a promise. I would tell this story, if not today then someday. Not because I wanted attention or sympathy, but because somewhere, another woman might be lying in a bed beside someone who feels safe too. And because the truth, no matter how much it shatters, is the only thing that let me finally sleep alone and live. Before him, my life was quiet in a way that felt heavier with every passing year. At 35, I wasn't lonely all the time, but I was lonely enough to notice it. My friends were married or divorced or juggling kids and careers that demanded everything they had. I had a good job, a small but comfortable apartment, and routines that kept me busy. Early morning coffee, evening walks, the same grocery store on Sundays. From the outside, I looked fine. From the inside, I felt like I was waiting for something to start. I told myself I enjoyed the independence. And I did mostly. But there were nights when the quiet felt accusatory. Like my life was asking why I hadn't figured it out yet. I met him on an evening like that. It wasn't romantic in the way stories usually are. No lightning bolt, no instant obsession. We were both standing in line at a neighborhood bookstore cafe, complaining politely about how expensive everything had gotten. He turned to me with a crooked smile and said something dry about inflation stealing his happiness one latte at a time. I laughed because I didn't expect to. He had a calm presence, grounded, unshowy. The kind of man who made you feel like he was really listening when you spoke, not just waiting for his turn. We talked about books, about how we both preferred rainy days, about nothing particularly important. When he asked for my number, it felt natural, unforced. Our first few dates were easy. Coffee that turned into long walks. Dinners where the conversation never stalled. He didn't rush me or play games. At my age, that mattered more than grand gestures. I was tired of decoding texts and wondering where I stood. He made it clear where I stood. I like you, he said simply one night as we sat in his car, the engine still idling. No dance around it. Just honesty that felt refreshing. So I let myself relax. After years of being cautious, of guarding my heart like something fragile, I began to believe I didn't have to anymore. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered small things. How I took my coffee, the song that always made me cry in the car, the name of my childhood dog. It felt less like falling and more like settling into something solid. When we started spending the night together, I remember thinking how safe it felt to sleep beside him. That surprised me. I'd always been a light sleeper, especially with someone new. With him, my body seemed to decide before my mind did. Safe. He wasn't overly affectionate in public, but in private he was attentive in a quiet, deliberate way. He listened when I talked about my job, about my parents' messy divorce, about the fear that I'd waited too long to build a life with someone. He never dismissed those fears. He told me I was right on time. No one had ever put it that way before. When he first spoke about moving in together, I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid to want it too much. I'd built my life carefully after a few relationships that taught me how easy it was to lose yourself trying to hold on to someone. He noticed my hesitation. He always did. We don't have to rush, he said. I just like the idea of waking up next to you. It sounded harmless. Sweet even. So I said yes. Life with him slid into place almost unnoticed. His toothbrush beside mine. His shoes by the door. His arms around me in the kitchen while I cooked. Friends commented on how relaxed I seemed, how happy. I let myself believe I had finally chosen right. Not passion that burned out quickly, but companionship that steadied me. Looking back, I can see the tiny cracks barely visible at first. The way he didn't like when I changed plans last minute. How his jaw tightened when I mentioned an ex, even casually. The questions he asked about my schedule that felt like interest until they felt like something else. But at the time I explained it all away. Love makes you generous with interpretation. It teaches you to soften hard edges with excuses because the alternative, Being alone again feels heavier. I remember lying in bed one night, his arm draped over me, watching shadows move across the ceiling as cars passed outside. I feel safe with you, I told him softly. He held me a little tighter. That's because you are, he said. I believed him. That was the most dangerous thing about it. Not that he deceived me loudly or dramatically, but that he gave me exactly what I'd been craving. Stability. Consistency. The illusion that the world could be kept out if I chose the right person to let in. As sleep pulled me under that night, I had no idea that the same arms holding me had been used to hurt someone else. I didn't know that love, when tangled with denial, could become a place where danger goes unnoticed. All I knew was that I wasn't alone anymore, and I thought that was enough. There was no single moment when doubt announced itself. It crept in quietly, polite enough that I almost felt rude questioning it. First it was his moods. Not anger exactly, more like sharp edges where softness used to be. He'd come home tense some nights, jaw tight, answers clipped. When I asked what was wrong, he'd shrug it off. Just tired. Long day. I believed him because I wanted to, because pushing felt unnecessary, and because everyone is allowed bad days. I told myself that relationships weren't supposed to be perfect, just steady. But the steadiness started to shift. He began to comment on my schedule more than before. Not accusingly, never that. Just observations. You're working late again? Dinner with Sarah 2 nights in a row? Always said with a smile, always followed by a kiss, but something under it made me feel like I needed to explain. I found myself justifying normal things. Texting him updates without thinking. Reassuring him before he even asked. When my best friend Leah pulled me aside one afternoon, I laughed her concerns away. He just worries, I said. It's sweet, actually. She raised her eyebrows in that way only someone who's known you for 20 years can. Just don't stop being you, she said carefully. I promised her I wouldn't. Then I slowly did. I skipped a happy hour because he seemed disappointed when I mentioned it. I cut dinner short when he texted that he missed me. None of it felt forced, more like choosing harmony over conflict. Love requires compromise, right? That was the word I used every time something made my chest tighten. The first real lie appeared one evening when I borrowed his phone. Mine was dead and I was waiting for a call from work. He handed it to me without hesitation. That should have reassured me. Instead, I noticed how quickly he turned away, busying himself with the sink. A message preview popped up from someone I didn't recognize. Did you take care of it? My stomach dipped. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I opened the messages, half expecting some harmless explanation to reveal itself. But the thread was mostly blank. Recent messages deleted. Only that single line sat there, floating without context. When I asked him about it lightly, he barely paused. Work thing, he said. Boring stuff. That was it. No elaboration. No eye contact. The moment passed, but it lodged itself somewhere deep, joining a growing collection of moments I didn't know what to do with. Minor things started to bother me in a way I couldn't articulate. The way he sometimes watched the door instead of me when we were out. How he grew irritated if I interrupted him while he was concentrating. How his apologies came quickly but never included real explanation. I began keeping mental notes. Not because I felt threatened, but because something inside me wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. At night, lying beside him, I'd listen to his breathing and replay conversations in my head. I'd tell myself I was overthinking. I'd remind myself of all the good. How he made me coffee in the morning, how he remembered my mom's birthday, how he held me when I cried during a commercial that hit too close to home. People are complicated, I told myself. Love means accepting imperfections. But once that door opens, once you start explaining things away, it doesn't close easily. The distance between us grew subtle but undeniable. He became more guarded, more private. His phone never left his side. His temper flickered faster, though he always seemed genuinely remorseful afterward. I hate that part of me, he said once after snapping at me over something trivial. He held my face in his hands like he was afraid I might disappear. I'd never hurt you. The intensity in his eyes made my throat tighten. I know, I said. And I meant it. I wanted to believe that reassurance was enough to anchor us back to safety. I wanted to believe love could outpace whatever darkness flickered behind that promise. But even as I said the words, a small voice inside me whispered something colder. People rarely say what they already know. The night I couldn't sleep, I realized how much I had changed. I lay there staring at the ceiling, counting the breaths between us. My body tense in a place that once felt like rest. I thought about the woman I had been before him. Independent, skeptical, slow to trust. I wondered when exactly I had decided that feeling chosen mattered more than feeling certain. In the morning, I watched him dress for work, buttoning his shirt in the mirror. He caught my eye through the glass and smiled. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said automatically. That word came easy by then. Nothing. It smoothed over uncomfortable feelings, filled gaps where questions lived. As the door closed behind him, the apartment felt too quiet. I stood alone in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter, heart heavy with something I couldn't name yet. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment when love stopped feeling like safety and started feeling like something I was managing. And no one tells you how dangerous it is to manage fear instead of listening to it. The story came on while I was making dinner. The TV was background noise most nights, local news murmuring while I chopped vegetables or checked my phone. I wasn't really watching until I heard the words "missing woman," and my hands stilled mid-motion. They showed her photo on the screen. Blonde hair pulled back, a soft, ordinary smile. She looked like someone I might pass in the grocery store, someone who might live a few streets over. The reporter said her name slowly, carefully, like it deserved respect. She'd been missing for 3 days. I told myself I was reacting because I was a woman, because stories like this always hit close to home. Because we're taught from the time we're young to imagine ourselves in those situations. I turned the volume up without thinking. They mentioned where she was last seen. A place too close to ignore. When he walked in a few minutes later, I was still standing in the kitchen, knife resting uselessly on the cutting board. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys. "Smells good." I gestured toward the TV. "Have you seen this?" He glanced at the screen. For just a second, so quick I almost missed it, his body went rigid, like a muscle locking defensively before the mind catches up. Then he shrugged. "Yeah," he said. "Sad." That was all. Not terrible, not scary, not oh my God. Just sad. His eyes flicked away almost immediately, like the image made him uncomfortable in a way grief didn't explain. I watched him instead of the screen. He washed his hands, moved around the kitchen, asked about my day. He never looked back at the TV. When the reporter mentioned that police were asking for anyone with information to come forward, he changed the subject entirely. "Do you want pasta or rice?" Something cold settled low in my stomach. I didn't say anything. I told myself again, you're reading too much into it. People react differently to these things. Not everyone is glued to tragedy. Some people need distance. But that night I dreamed of a woman running. I woke before dawn, heart racing, the sheets twisted around my legs. He slept beside me, face calm, one arm flung over my waist like ownership. I lay perfectly still, listening to his breathing, thinking about how unaware he seemed of the storm that had followed him into our lives. Over the next few days the story grew. They found her car abandoned. Then they found evidence of a struggle. The news anchors' voices grew more serious, more careful with their words. They stopped saying missing and started preparing viewers for something worse. He stopped watching the news entirely. If I turned it on, he'd leave the room. If I mentioned updates, he'd tense, then dismiss them. Once when I said her name out loud, just once, he snapped. "Why are you so obsessed with this?" The word obsessed landed hard. "I'm not," I said, startled. It's upsetting." "It has nothing to do with us," he replied sharply. Then, seeing my face, he exhaled and softened immediately. "I just hate that stuff. It messes with my head." I nodded, even though my own head was already a mess. I started noticing coincidences I didn't like. The timeline overlapping strangely with nights he'd come home late. The route they believed she'd taken, one he drove often. The way he knew details about the area the police hadn't released publicly, brushing it off as common knowledge when I questioned him. Every explanation on its own made sense. Together, they formed a picture I didn't want to look at. One afternoon, I stood in the grocery store staring at a stack of tabloids near the checkout. Her face was on the cover now. The headline screamed words meant to grab attention, but all I could see was her smile. Her ordinariness. I wondered who loved her. who was pacing a floor the way I'd done nights before, waiting for a knock at the door. When I came home, he asked why I looked upset. "It's that woman," I said carefully. They think she's dead." His reaction was immediate and wrong. "Of course they do," he muttered. I froze. "What?" He looked up, realized he'd said too much. I mean, the media always jumps to conclusions. There it was. That familiar tightening in my chest. The feeling that I was always half a step behind, grasping at something just out of reach. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the dark. Questions stacked up until they felt too heavy to ignore. What did I actually know about the man sleeping beside me? I realized how little I'd asked about his past. How many details I'd accepted vaguely. Love had made me polite where I should have been curious. A week later, they found her body. I was at work when the alert popped up on my phone. My vision blurred as I read it, the words blurring into one another until all that remained was the knowledge that she would not be coming home. I thought of her last moments. A fear. Of trust misplaced. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. When I came home, he was already there. Sitting in the dark. "I know," he said before I could speak. That sent a chill through me. "You know what? They found her." I hadn't told him yet. I watched his face carefully as he spoke, too controlled, too blank. No grief. No anger. Just something watchful, calculating. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. That was the moment I understood that whatever I was dealing with wasn't just discomfort or relationship trouble. It was something darker. Something that had been in my home, in my bed, breathing beside me while I slept. I went to the bathroom and locked the door for the first time in my own house. Sitting on the cold tile, knees pulled to my chest, I whispered the name of the woman I'd never met. I promised her something then, though I didn't yet know how I would keep it. I promised I wouldn't look away anymore. Because once you recognize fear for what it is, pretending becomes its own kind of crime. Once fear has a name, it starts asking for proof. I didn't suddenly become brave. I became quiet. There's a difference. Bravery walks straight into danger. Silence learns how not to be noticed. And something inside me, something older than love, older than trust, understood that I needed the second one first. I stopped reacting out loud. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he touched me. I asked fewer questions and volunteered less information. I let him believe everything was normal, because I was no longer sure what he might do if he sensed otherwise. That realization alone was enough to make me feel sick. At night, I waited until his breathing shifted into the slower rhythm of sleep before I allowed my thoughts any freedom. I stared into the dark, replaying moments from the past 2 years like surveillance footage. Conversations, gestures, silences that now glowed with meaning. I told myself I needed certainty. I told myself that suspicion without evidence was just fear spiraling. So I started to look. It began with small things. Laundry mostly. I told myself I was just being practical, helping out more around the house. One evening, while folding his clothes, I noticed a shirt I didn't recognize. Dark fabric. Heavy. Still faintly damp, as if it had been washed twice. There was a rust-colored stain near the cuff. Faded but not gone. My pulse thudded in my ears. I held the fabric up to the light, my fingers shaking. Blood crosses your mind faster than anything else. Even when you don't want it to. Even when it terrifies you. I forced myself to breathe. Could be anything, I told myself. Rust. Coffee. Paint. But I didn't throw it back in the pile. I hid it instead. That was the moment I crossed a line I didn't know how to uncross. The moment I became someone who kept secrets not for love, but for survival. Next came the garage. He was particular about it, liked things in place, didn't like me rearranging. That alone had once struck me as mildly controlling, nothing more. Now it felt like a locked door. One Saturday while he was out, I stood at the threshold, heart pounding as if I were about to commit a crime myself. The air inside smelled like oil and cold concrete. I moved slowly, touching nothing at first, just looking. At the back, behind some stacked boxes, I found a duffel bag I'd never seen before. I didn't open it right away. I waited, counted to 10, then another 10. Inside were gloves, thick ones, a flashlight, and a folded jacket, dark, heavy, stiff in a way fabric shouldn't be. I didn't check for stains. I didn't need to. My body already knew what my mind was trying to avoid. I zipped the bag closed exactly how I found it. Then I went inside and threw up. After that, everything felt unreal, like I was watching my life through glass. I went to work. I answered emails. I laughed at the right moments, all while carrying the weight of what I couldn't tell anyone yet. I started documenting things. Dates. Times. Things he said. Things he did. I hid notes in benign places. Draft emails, grocery lists, the back of a planner I rarely used. I took photos and saved them under random names. I hated myself for how calculated I was becoming, but I hated the alternative more. He noticed the change in me. "You've been quiet," he said one night, studying my face too closely. "Everything okay?" The way he asked made my skin prickle. "Not concern, assessment. Just tired," I said, borrowing his word. He nodded, but his eyes lingered. I wondered if he could hear my heartbeat, if he sensed the distance opening between us. That night, he reached for me in his sleep. His arm wrapped around me, possessive, familiar. I lay still, staring into the dark, every nerve awake. I thought about the woman on the news, about evidence, about how love isn't supposed to feel like this, like you're memorizing escape routes. The breaking point came faster than I expected. It was his phone. He'd left it charging in the living room when he went to shower. I stood there staring at it for a long moment, my chest tight with indecision. I had promised myself I wouldn't cross certain boundaries. I was past promises. The screen lit up easily. No password. That itself felt intentional, confidence dressed as transparency. I searched names, messages, deleted threads. Then I found photos. Not explicit ones. Not trophies. Something worse. Locations. Roads. Parking lots. Close-ups of places that meant nothing to me, until I recognized one. The wooded area near where they'd found her body. My knees buckled and I sat hard on the couch. The shower was still running. I didn't have time to think. Instinct took over. I sent copies to myself, using an email address he didn't know about. My hands moved automatically, like they belonged to someone calmer, someone stronger. When I put the phone back exactly where it had been, I realized my hands were bleeding. I'd bitten my lip without noticing. Later that evening, as we sat across from each other eating dinner, the world felt warped. Every sound too loud. Every movement exaggerated. He talked about work, about plans, about the future. I watched his mouth form words and wondered how many versions of him existed. The man I loved, the man I feared, the man I didn't fully know. A knock at the door cut through the moment like a blade. We both froze. He stood first. Too fast. I reached for his arm without thinking. Wait. Our eyes met. Something flashed there, alarm, calculation, something raw and ugly. He covered it quickly. "I've got it," he said. But as he walked toward the door, I knew. This wasn't coincidence anymore. This was momentum. Truth finally catching up to the secrets living in my house. I stood behind him, heart pounding so hard it hurt, knowing that whatever waited on the other side of that door would change everything. And knowing that love, real love, doesn't require you to hold your breath to survive it. The knock came again, firm, deliberate. Not a neighbor. Not a delivery. Police. I knew it before I saw them. The rhythm of it carried authority, not impatience. My body reacted faster than my thoughts. My hands went numb, my mouth dry. He turned and looked at me, then really looked, and for a split second the man I loved disappeared. What replaced him was someone calculating distance, time, options. "I'll handle it," he said quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't move. I stood there as he opened the door and two uniformed officers filled the doorway, their presence instantly shrinking our living room. They asked his name. He gave it without hesitation. Calm. Cooperative. They asked if they could come in. He stepped aside. I watched every movement, every word traded between them, the air thickening with tension. They weren't accusatory yet, just probing, asking about his whereabouts on certain dates, about his car, about what he knew of the woman whose face I could no longer escape. I sat on the couch, hands folded tightly in my lap, answering only when spoken to. My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. Eventually they thanked us and left. Just like that. The door closed. The silence rushed back in. He turned to me slowly. "They don't have anything," he said. "Just routine questions." I nodded. My heart was slamming against my ribs. "Okay." We stood there facing each other, while something unspeakable stretched between us. He watched me too closely, waiting for something. Fear. Accusation. Confession. I gave him none of it. That night he didn't sleep. Neither did I. We lay back to back, a gulf of inches between us that might as well have been miles. I counted the seconds, waited for something, anything to happen. At some point just before dawn, he rolled onto his side. "You're different," he said into the dark. My spine went rigid. "Different how?" "Distant," he replied. A pause. "You don't look at me the same way." There it was. I turned to face him. The dim light outlined his features, the same face I had studied with tenderness for years. Now I searched it for truth the way investigators search a crime scene. "I'm scared," I said. He softened instantly, sat up, reached for me. "Of what?" I let out a shaky breath. "Of what happened to her. Of how close it was. It makes you realize how fragile things are." That was safe. Vague. True enough. He watched me for a long moment, then nodded. "It does." He didn't let go of my hand. The confession didn't come then. It came days later, when the tension had stretched itself thin and silence had grown heavier than speech. We were in the kitchen. Night again. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud. It was tired. "You ever wonder how easy it would be," he said, "for someone to disappear?" I froze. "What do you mean?" He leaned against the counter, rubbing his face with both hands. "I mean, people think violence is loud, obvious, but it's not. Most of the time it's quiet, quick, a mistake that gets out of control." Every nerve in my body screamed. I kept my voice steady. "Why are you saying this?" He looked at me, then really looked, and I saw it. Not guilt exactly. Ownership. The need to tell someone without actually saying the words. "She trusted someone," he said. That was the problem. My heart stuttered. "Who?" He exhaled slowly, like he was bracing himself. "Someone she thought would never hurt her." The room tilted. I didn't interrupt. I didn't accuse. I let the silence do its work. "You don't understand what pressure can do to a person," he continued. "How fast it can switch something off inside you. One moment you're trying to fix things. The next, you're trying to make sure they don't get worse." "Worse how?" I whispered. He looked down at his hands. And in that posture, head bowed, shoulders heavy, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't seeking forgiveness. He was explaining. "They keep saying monster," he said quietly. "But monsters don't feel anything. Monsters don't lose sleep." My throat burned. "And you think that makes it better?" "I think it makes it human," he replied. Something settled in me then. Cold. Certain. I was not safe. I stood slowly, creating distance. "I think you should talk to a lawyer." His head snapped up. "What?" "I think you should tell the police what you just told me." The room went silent again, but this time it was different. Charged. Dangerous. He stepped toward me. "You don't know what you're implying." "I do," I said, my voice barely steady. "And I can't carry this for you." His expression hardened, the softness vanishing. "You wouldn't do that to me." I swallowed. "I won't do that to myself." For a moment I thought he might reach for me, not in comfort but in control. My body prepared to run, to scream, to do anything it needed to survive. Then something flickered in his eyes. Resignation. "They'll never understand," he said finally. "I do," I replied. "And that's why I'm telling them." That was the moment I stopped being his secret keeper. That was the moment love finally let go, and fear gave me something stronger in its place. The truth. I didn't call the police that night. That's the part people struggle with the most when I tell this story. They want a clean moment, a dramatic phone call, lights flashing immediately, justice arriving on cue. Real life doesn't work like that. Real fear rarely allows for clean decisions. What I did instead was wait until he left. The next morning he kissed my forehead before work like everything was normal, like he hadn't peeled back the edges of something monstrous only hours before. I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to his car, my body vibrating with the effort it took not to collapse. I locked the door behind him and slid down onto the floor. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I gathered everything I'd hidden: notes, photos, screenshots, timestamps. I laid them out on the dining table like evidence at a trial, each piece heavier than the last. Seeing it all together stripped away any lingering doubt. This was real. By noon, I was sitting in a small interview room at the police station, staring at a gray wall while a paper cup of water sweated onto the table in front of me. The detective across from me spoke gently, but his eyes were sharp. He'd heard stories like mine before. Maybe not many, but enough. I told them everything. About the changes in his behavior. About the lies. About the photos. About the things he'd said in the kitchen. The way he'd almost confessed without ever saying the word. My voice broke more than once, but I didn't stop. When I finished, the silence felt enormous. The detective nodded slowly. You did the right thing. The words didn't bring relief. They cut something open instead. Doing the right thing doesn't feel heroic when it costs you the person you built your life around. They asked me to wait in the station for a while. Procedure, they said. Safety, they said. I stared at my phone, half expecting it to light up with his name. It didn't. They arrested him that evening. I wasn't there when they put him in handcuffs. I saw it later. Footage from a neighbor's door camera that someone shared with the media. He looked smaller than I remembered. Sharper too. As if whatever mask he'd worn with me was no longer necessary. When his face flashed across the news, my phone exploded. Friends. Family. Coworkers. Questions I didn't know how to answer. Did you know? How could you not know? Are you okay? I stopped responding after a while. The house felt poisoned. Every room carried echoes of a life I no longer recognized. I packed a bag and went to stay with Leah, who hugged me so tightly I finally cried the way I'd been holding in for days. The guilt hit hardest at night. I lay awake wondering if I could have seen it sooner. If my silence had given him time. If loving him had meant indirectly betraying someone else's safety. Trauma has a way of turning you into your own harshest prosecutor. The trial moved fast. Evidence stacked up. My testimony became part of something bigger than my pain. I sat in the courtroom once, watching him from across the room. He didn't look at me. I wasn't sure if that hurt or helped. When the verdict came, I didn't feel relief. I felt hollow. It's a strange thing, grieving someone who is still alive, while mourning the person you never knew they could be. In therapy, they told me something that slowly began to settle the chaos in my chest. You didn't break anything. You stopped something broken from continuing. I still carry the fracture. I probably always will. But I also carry the truth. And there is strength in that even when it costs you everything else. Life doesn't snap back into place after something like this. It stretches, slow, uneven, unfamiliar, until you learn how to move inside it again. In the months after the trial, I shrank my world down to manageable pieces. Work, therapy, short walks where I counted my steps and focused on the rhythm of my breathing. Healing, I learned, wasn't about feeling better. It was about learning how to live with what didn't go away. The nightmares came first. I'd wake up tangled in sheets, heart racing, my body convinced he was still beside me. Sometimes I'd swear I could smell his shampoo. Hear his voice say my name the way it used to sound tender. Trauma doesn't respect logic. It replays emotion, not fact. Therapy helped me untangle the guilt. I said her name out loud there for the first time. The woman whose life had intersected with mine in the most horrific way possible. Saying her name made her real in a way headlines never had. It reminded me this story was bigger than my grief. Bigger than my shame. For a long time I avoided mirrors. When I did catch my reflection, I searched my own face for someone naive, someone foolish. Someone to blame. What I slowly started to see instead was someone who survived deception crafted carefully and intentionally. That distinction mattered. I moved out of the house and into a small apartment across town. New walls. New locks. New routines. On my first night there, I lay in bed alone and felt something unexpected settle over me. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But the absence of fear. I learned that love, real love, does not require vigilance. It does not make you smaller or quieter or constantly explain away your own discomfort. Love expands you. It gives you room to breathe. For a long time I wasn't sure I'd ever trust myself again. let alone someone else. The hardest apology I had to make was to myself, for doubting my instincts, for mistaking fear for compromise. But instincts return if you listen. I started speaking about what happened, carefully at first, then more openly. Not for attention, but because silence had nearly cost me everything once already. Women reached out, women who recognized pieces of their own lives in mine. I thought it was just me. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Thank you for saying this out loud. That was when I understood why surviving wasn't enough. Stories warn. Stories connect. Stories remind us that danger doesn't announce itself with claws and shadows. Sometimes it comes in steady hands and soft voices. I still think about her. I think about the ordinary things she should have gotten to do. Grow older, change her mind, laugh at inside jokes, feel safe. I think about how easily any of us can become a headline if we trust the wrong person in a moment of vulnerability. Telling this story is how I honor her. By refusing to soften the truth. By refusing to romanticize evil or turn warning signs into footnotes. I don't call him my ex anymore. I don't give him language that implies love or loss. I call him what he was. A man who hid behind normalcy, and who mistook control for power. As for me, I am still here. I sleep alone now, but I do not feel lonely. I know the sound of my own safety. I know the weight of my own breath. I know that survival isn't weakness. It's proof. And if there is one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. If something feels wrong, you are allowed to listen. No matter how much you've been told, love means trusting past your fear. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wake up and live. If you've reached this point, thank you. Thank you for staying with me through something that was painful to relive, and I hope meaningful to read. This story isn't about fear for the sake of fear. It's about awareness, about how easily danger can hide inside familiarity, and how important it is to trust the quiet voice inside you when something doesn't feel right. If parts of this story unsettled you, that was never the intention in a careless way. It's meant to reflect a truth many people live with silently, that intuition is not weakness, and love should never require you to ignore your own safety. To anyone who saw themselves in these pages, please know this. Confusion is not the same as consent. Doubt is not failure. And leaving, speaking up, or asking for help is an act of strength, not betrayal. If you're here because you love true crime, I hope this story reminded you that behind every headline is a real life, a real family, and real consequences that ripple outward in ways we rarely see. And if you're here because you're wondering about your own situation, let this be permission to pause and listen to yourself. You deserve peace. If this story moved you, helped you, or made you think, like it so more people can find it, share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And subscribe to continue supporting stories that center truth, empathy, and awareness. Your support helps ensure stories like this get told and heard. Take care of yourself.